Las Vegas Raiders, who've had one of the more interesting off seasons in general, with hiring Pete Carroll, trading for Geno, and then doing what was chalk for a minute, but people started to go back and forth on, and they do take Ashton Jeanty, running back out of Boise State, 6th overall.
There was reports kind of later in the draft cycle, which always seem to be more accurate. The later the report, it seems the more accurate of the report. That they would possibly go tackle with this pick, and they were looking at Kelvin Banks. But like you said, they ended up going to the chalk pick, and for all the things we've said about running back, those all go out the window when you're talking about an elite player like Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty is one of the best running back prospects of this generation, man. I mean, probably best running back prospect. Bijan and him would be pretty close, but definitely right up there with Saquon and guys like that. So a very elite prospect. And the Raiders are also in a more interesting position. Like when Saquon went to the Giants at 2, they have had a bad offensive line then, and it never got better. The Raiders' offensive line isn't awful. It's not awful. It's not the best in the league. It's not like it's top 10, but it's a solid average, I would say, offensive line, which is not typical for teams drafting in the top 10. But with that being said, when you already have an average offensive line, I get taking the running back, especially when we're talking about a guy like Ashton Jeanty, who is truly, we don't like to throw this term around a lot, Dakota, but generational type player as far as college production and things like that are concerned.
Yeah, I'm still torn on it personally, and I can take heat for it. I don't know if I would have taken Jeanty if I were the Raiders. I may have gone in a different direction. Um, but I absolutely love Jeanty the player, and I do kind of like the fit with the Raiders and him coming in to kind of honestly be potentially the face of the franchise for them now as well. They've got Max Crosby on the defensive side, but adding a guy like Jeanty on the offensive side, where they've not really had a major offensive weapon for a minute. Um, I do love that aspect of it, and Jeanty as a player. I mean, the guy is elite at everything he does. He is incredible at breaking tackles, and the whole playing. I hated all the arguments with him and playing at the level that he's playing at, because his offensive line is also worse at Boise State than it would be at an SEC program, and he's still doing what he's doing. And breaking tackles is the biggest indicator, and if you do that well, it doesn't really matter where you're playing.
He did it against better competition for one, and also another thing is, why aren't other players as productive as Jeanty was
Yeah,
in those? I
great
mean,
point.
those teams play every year. The group of 5 teams play every single year, but no one's been as productive as Ashton Jeanty was. So, and I get the competition questions. You have to ask those questions, but when you see him against Penn State and they're literally putting 8 in the box every single play, like right there, all of a sudden you can already say from a coaching perspective, right? Penn State clearly knows Ashton Jeanty is who people say he is. Like he's like, by putting 8 in the box, they're saying, okay, this guy, we're not going to let this guy beat us. Like, what, we're going to make them pass on us. But also in that game, Dakota, even though the stats weren't there, dude, he was phenomenal in that game. But
Mhm.
there's only so much you can do when they're putting 8 guys in the box and he's breaking 3 tackles a play and getting 3 yards out of it. Like, there's only so much you can do as a running back. So I think the competition questions were answered in the college football playoff, even though he didn't put up the stats in that game. And again, and I get it from your perspective too. Like, listen, number 6 overall is high for a running back. That is extremely high for a running back. And like, look at the Bijan thing, right? Like, can Falcons fans truly say Bijan has been worth taking number 8 overall at this point in his career? I don't think you can. Now that they have their franchise quarterback, maybe things will change, and Bijan will start to become more productive. But again, I think in a Pete Carroll offense, right? I mean, Pete Carroll still remembering the
Oh yeah.
days when they had Russell Wilson, who was frankly in early in his career was more of a game managing type quarterback with Marshawn Lynch, and they relied on the run game. And Geno Smith is, I wouldn't even call Geno a game manager, but he's not an elite level quarterback, Dakota. He's not, but he's
Yeah.
really good, right? He's really good. He's shown the last few years at Seattle that he's really good. But how do you make a guy like Geno kind of like elevate his play? Bring a guy like Ashton Jeanty in who can be an elite running back, and start loading up on weapons, which I think, we'll get into. They did a pretty good job of doing throughout the rest of the draft. So specifically for the Raiders in the top 10, out of any of the other teams drafting in the top 10 outside the Bears, I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I definitely like it more than I liked Bijan pick, because with the Falcons at that time, they had just drafted Tyler Algier in the late round and had a really good year as a rookie, and then you draft a running back 8th overall. Raiders have no one, and they were dead last in PFF rushing grade last season. The Zamir White stuff hadn't worked out. They just have not had a running game for a minute. So I do like it from that perspective, and I understand it. I don't hate it. It's just I could have seen going in a different direction, but I do think the value of that is really is good for the Raiders, and pairing him with Geno, and kind of getting to play football the way that Pete Carroll wants to. Definitely have to note too that like Jinty's known for his breaking tackles. 152 missed tackles forced last season, but he's also just so explosive.
Yes.
He had 10. He's the only back in college football with 10 or more touchdown runs of 20 plus, and he had 12. So the guy could just take anything to the house at any minute. So he will make, and that's one of the effects we've taught, has come up with Saquon a lot, is the value of having a guy that probably once a game is going to bust a 40 plus yard run is pretty valuable. So
extremely valuable, man. And another note with Jeanty too is he has more to unlock in his passing game as far as a receiving back is concerned. They just didn't utilize that last year at Boise, but he's actually really good at it, man. He showed it throughout his college career that he can be a scat back type. So he's truly a 3-down running back that's going to stay on the field every down, no matter what the circumstances. So I mean, he's a fascinating prospect, and again, it's just another case study of, is it worth taking a running back this high in the draft? Like, is it worth it? And again, I've just mentioned all the 7th round running backs that are going to be productive and stuff, but the most important thing with drafting is hitting on the player. That is the most important thing. Making sure the player is going to be a good player. And I think there's a very small percentage that Jeanty's not going to be a good player, right? Like he's very likely going to become at least a productive NFL player at some point in his career. So I get it from the Raiders perspective, and from the face of the franchise perspective, man. Like no one's going to sell more jerseys than Ashton Jeanty this year for the Raiders. So
going to see a lot of those number 2 jerseys out there for sure. They then attack the offense in round 2 with Jack Besh, wide receiver out of TCU. He has a really cool story. His brother passed away from the terrorist attack that was in New Orleans. And then at the Senior Bowl, it was just like 1 month after that, he ends up having the game-winning touchdown, which was just a really cool moment. Seems like he's one of those guys too, from a character perspective, which Jeanty has that going for him as well, that you just would want in your locker room. Decent athlete, was pretty productive at TCU. Has an interesting skill set that I think could plug into their offense and get playing time pretty soon.
Oh yeah, I mean he's listed as a starter right now on our lands or Outlats, dude. So that is very interesting. And I also love the point that you just brought up as far as locker room guys are concerned. It does feel like the Raiders are kind of due for like a reset as far as the culture is concerned. Like it feels like that's kind of been kind of rough since the McDaniels era, where like he was pretty hated by players, and then they had Antonio Pierce, and it seemed like the players liked him, but he just wasn't he wasn't ready to be head coach. So they are kind of due for that reset. And you're right, dude. Taking Jack Besh and Ashton Jeanty with your first 2 picks, that's a locker room reset. I mean, those are 2 very high character guys, which has to be taken into account. But they're also good players. And Jack Besh is not an exception to that. He's also a very good player. And like I said, slated to start. Like this is a receiving core that desperately needs help. I think Raiders fans know that since losing Devontae Adams, they are, Jacoby Myers is a good number 2 wide receiver, but you don't want him as your number 1 option, man. You really don't. Now you get Jack Besh in there to be another option as well, and then they continue to attack it throughout the draft. So
absolutely love him in the 2nd round there to pair with Geno Smith, get some weapons out there on that offense alongside Jeanty as well. And then in the third round, they take one of the more interesting prospects in the entire draft, Darian Porter, corner out of Iowa State, insane athlete. Ran a 4.3 and had a 1.49 10-yard split. But is so fascinating. He was in college for 6 years, and we still kind of just don't know what he is. He only had like 7 games this past season of starting at corner. He was at wide receiver at one point, but he actually looked really good when he finally slotted in and started playing corner full time.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest X factors in the draft because Darian Porter had first round tape as at cornerback this past season, but like you said, late breakout just because he was never given an opportunity at corner. He was a wide receiver for a long time and a special teams player, and then when he was finally given his opportunity at cornerback, he broke out in college, and also an extremely high level athlete with high level production at cornerback with the very few amount of snaps he's had. So I mean, this could be a guy who ends up being one of the best corners from the class that you got in the third round just because, it is a bit of a risk because you just don't know. There's so many question marks about him as far as, sample size is concerned that you can't really take that risk higher than the third round. But again, you could get a first round talent in the third round. So I think it is worth the risk in the third round. So I really loved that pick, man. Again, another guy that I think will find his way onto the field. He's not listed as a starter right now, but he's behind Eric Stokes. I don't think Eric Stokes is going to stop him from starting. So I think Porter will end up being a starting cornerback at some point for the Raiders, which again, very valuable in the third round. So I love that pick.
And I love the fit. I mean, he is a Pete Carroll guy, 6'3". He
Yep.
loves his tall, long corners. Richard Sherman and those guys were kind of really one of the ones that revolutionized the position to a degree where it was always you want a smaller guy, but with athleticism changing and guys at 6'3" running 4.3s and having the agility they do, having length and size at corner like that is valuable. And I know Pete Carroll is they were probably frothing at the mouth to get him into the building. So going to love to see him in that defense. Um, they then double up offensive linemen. Couple guys that, again, the Raiders' offensive line is not in great shape, but they double up with Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant, a couple guys who I would consider them more than developmental. I think they're guys that could come in and start competing for jobs along that offensive line, or at least, shorter development times to earn a spot on it. And then this division had two of the only, three Vols we had drafted. But then they take wide receiver Dante Thornton Jr. Again, we have this first person perspective on him. Another fascinating prospect. He was started at Oregon, transferred to Tennessee in 2023. Didn't really do much. He got hurt at the end of the year. We didn't see him much in 2023. And to be honest, we were kind of like disappointed because he was supposed to be this big Oregon receiver that was transferring over and break out. But then in 2024 leads the team, but did not have very many catches and was a guy we were sitting there thinking, why are we not targeting him more?
Yeah, he was the best wide receiver on Tennessee's offense in 2024. There's no question about that. He has big play threat, man. That's who he is. I think his comp is DK Metcalf, but just not as big. Like he's a smaller version of DK, 6'5", running a 4.3, which is just stupid. I mean, that is stupid size and athleticism. He's just he has a limited route tree. I mean, he's more of a slants and goes kind of player. But that plays, man, that's gonna be interesting, and it's also fascinating pairing him with Geno Smith, who just came having a
Yep.
guy like DK Metcalf, and DK Metcalf being coached by Pete Carroll. So all of that is interesting when we're talking about like guys that fit into certain offenses and coaches fits, and it's interesting that they target a guy like Dante Thornton, which I think they probably see a little bit of DK in Dante. And Dante Thornton's going to play, man. I mean, right now he's listed behind Trey Tucker. I could see Dante Thornton taking Trey Tucker's job pretty early on. So they're attacking this offense, man, and they needed to. Like you said, they're getting offensive line depth. I think Charles Grant could get in play sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing in two wide receivers. I mean, they loaded up on offense, dude, to start this draft. Loading weapons around Geno, which I think is smart because, again, Geno is a good quarterback. Don't get me wrong, Raiders fans. You got a good quarterback. It's just he's not a guy that elevates, right? He's a guy that kind of needs good weapons around him to be successful. And I think they did that for Geno in this draft, dude. I think they got more great weapons around him, beefing up the offensive line, and of course bringing in Jeanty.
Yeah, and Thornton is interesting too because to your point with having just played with DK, he is a smaller version of him, but averaged his yards per reception last year were 25.5, which is just absurd. It's basically saying like obviously statistically it's not the same, but like basically you throw the ball to him 4 times and you score a touchdown, which
Yeah.
is kind of insane. And I love pairing his skill set alongside Jack Betch, who's going to be more of an underneath route running type guy. You get Thornton, who can stretch the field and blaze with that speed. So I love the two different types that they got to pair alongside Geno and Jeanty. And then a bunch of depth guys they add. They had a ton of picks. So they get Tonka Hemingway, D tackle out of South Carolina. JJ Puegs, the D tackle out of Ole Miss. So double up at D tackle, adding some depth there. And then an interesting pick. They go back to back, 2 picks apart. Quarterback Tommy Mellott out of Montana State, who's apparently going to be trying out at wide receiver.
Yep.
Guy's just very athletic. So they wanted to bring him in, flip him to receiver, see what they can do with him. Very interesting. And then they take actual quarterback Cam Miller out of North Dakota State, who now has kind of produced a good amount, whether they're great starters or not. I got a North Dakota State quarterbacks in the league now who are backing up places or were starters at one point.
Yeah, I
It's
thought
interesting.
those. Yeah, I agree. Those 2 picks were interesting. That the Tommy Mellott pick is very interesting because quarterback to wide receiver, extremely athletic, ran in the 4.3s if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be fascinating. And again, with the receiver depth on this team, he could find his way on the roster. Crazy enough, dude. I don't know. I don't know if this is going to be the case, but right now on our lads, he is listed behind Jacoby Myers, which is insane, dude. If this dude makes an NFL team as a wide receiver from playing quarterback in college, it's a fascinating story. And then Cam Miller was really good in the Colorado game. I watched him against Colorado this past season. He was really good in that game. I mean, I was just really impressed with him throughout that entire game. So very, very productive college player. And like you said, North Dakota State has this history now of putting out, uh, you know, NFL quarterbacks. Like they haven't really worked out. They've been drafted highly, but they haven't worked out. But this one's, developmental guy in the 6th. So I
Yeah.
like it.
I mean, hey, Wentz was a knee injury away from potentially winning an MVP. He was
True.
having a very good year that year. Um, then they wrap things up with Cody Lindenberg, linebacker out of Minnesota. Always feel good about your Minnesota linebackers. Depth piece there for sure. UDFA wise, one thing stood out here, which is Dorian Singer, wide receiver from Utah, who kind of transferred around over the place. But I think I don't know if he was a 5-star, but I think he was at least a 4-star receiver. That was a pretty big signing when he happened. So a guy that could potentially have some upside. That was a high recruit coming out of high school. Um, but yeah, with
I
that in
like it.
mind, what was your favorite pick for the Raiders?
Man, I kind of want to be biased again, dude. I really do. Um, I don't know. Honestly, there's a lot of picks to choose from here. I
Yeah, there
liked a
really
lot of their
is.
picks. I'm gonna go Darian Porter though in the 3rd round.
Okay.
This is a guy that really could end up being one of the better corners in the class in the 3rd round. So really love that pick.
I'll be biased. I'll do the bias this time. I'll say Dante
Love it.
Thornton. I just think, again, a lot of mine have been based on what they do before or after that, and I just love the value of that. So I love the fact that they double up at wide receiver in the first 4 rounds. They needed it. I mean, looking at their depth chart, there are guys on here. There's a reason Tommy Mellett's listed as second string, and
Yeah,
it's probably because the Our Lads
exactly.
dudes don't know who Alex Bachman and Tyreek McAllister are.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't either, so I'm right there with
No,
the Our
I don't want to
Lads,
show
dude.
it either. Yeah, I don't know who they are. So I love and Thornton's skill set. I think with Pete Carroll having drafted and coached DK Metcalf, obviously they're different. Like they are different. DK, I mean Dante's not shredded and a
No,
massive specimen, but he's going to stretch the field. He's going to run some slants, take them to the house. He can contested catch or burn downfield. So love that for Geno after having DK in Seattle.
same.
What does the consensus say about the Raiders?
The Raiders, let's see here. Why can I not find them on the list? They were pretty high up, if I'm not mistaken. Oh yeah, here we are. They're very high up, 6th overall in the NFL. So top 6 draft in the league. Um, I kind of agree with it, man. Like I get it's going to be very dependent on Genty and if Genty can live up to being a top 6 overall pick. But throughout the draft, I thought they just like hit on a couple guys, which I mean they're not hits yet, but you know what I mean. They got good consensus value. They attacked positions of need, and that I think they needed to attack like wide receiver. I mean, they brought in 3 wide receivers who apparently are all slated to either start or be, you know, right behind starters. So I think overall it was a solid draft for the Raiders, who really needed to reset and to rebuild, and I think they started that process.
Yeah, I agree with it too. I mean, they had what, 2, 4, 6, 7 picks in the top 135, and I think they put them all to valuable positions and added depth and guys to come compete. A lot of it will be predicated on what Ashton Jeanty becomes. But one thing I would also give them a bump for is they drafted in volume. They had 11 picks, and they didn't take any punters, long snappers, or kickers.
There you
You
go.
don't have to do that just because you
No.
have a ton of picks.